And I'd like to welcome Lesley now. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I do anything, that is one hard act to follow. And she's already taken my thunder and said a whole bunch of things I'm going to say. So bear with me, because as soon as I saw when Christina sent out the abstracts and I had written my paper, and I thought, oh my, she's going to say lots of the things that But I come from an art history point of view, and Florina Capistrano-Baker, who I've admired from afar for many years, is an anthropologist. She looks at motifs and pinpoints them down to the final little thing, and I tend not to do that. So bear with me if some of this is repeated. It's good for your revision, and you'll never forget it. So, okay, so let's go. But I'm going to start with me to bear with you, because I hope some of you might have realized that Deccan, my husband, and I have lived in the Philippines and first went there in 1978. I arrived with a tiny newborn baby. At that stage, when we were talking this morning about things that happened in the 70s, well, I was too busy with babies and playgroups and what have you, and never got around. But after we came back to London many years later, in 2014, we did this amazing journey, staying with my sister-in-law in Makati, and went down to the celebration at the bottom left, the Ati-Atihan, which was, to me, the biggest experience of my life and the best festival I've ever been to. And then the rest of the pictures are all taken up in the Cordillera. And I first went to the Cordillera region back in the 1970s. I left the baby with my wonderful Filipino maids and traveled up there. But going back this time later was heart-rending and extremely sad, but that's a different story. But I think one needs to travel back to the Cordillera region many times to see what's happening, and hopefully we can work on some form of revival there. Anyhow, that's me. So my book that I produced out of my PhD in 2021 was known Pattern Splendor, and I made a lot of maps for the book. And my interest in trade, and we've seen lots of maps over the last few days, or the last 2 days, is about the movement, not only from South Asia to China and back, but it's just the people, it's the textiles, and it's religion. And, of course, Islam as well. And I showed you yesterday a map on Islam and how it affected the southern Philippines. But, of course, in this map, the only line that was interest to the Philippines is the yellow one, which I put down as the Chinese trade. Apart from that, when I did my research here, the Philippines didn't come into it at all because religion never went there, and the trade of ceramics and art styles never really hit the Philippines at all. This map we saw earlier, so once again, here we go. But the Austronesians, and we had this yesterday, and the Maranao. So really what we're doing here is looking at how people move between this area and what did they move with. What were the styles that were carried between these two areas? So my paper is very much about the Maranao, which is spelt with an A-O or an A-W. I have to say I see it very seldom with an A-W, and I hope someone's going to tell me which is the correct term to be used today. So Lesor, they are a Muslim ethno-linguistic people and located in the southern Philippines, which stands across a geographical maritime intersection. Early migrations from China and coastal and regional traders influenced Islam, which reached the southern islands around 1400, before the Spanish conquest in 1521. Such a historical framework contributes to a further dimension to any study of Maranao textiles. This ubiquitous object on the left, which is used in-house, remains known as a lotam or salapa. There seem to be many different ways of describing these betel nut boxes. And when I first started researching this paper, I realized that when I was that young bride in 1978, that a man came to my door to sell us these, and we bought 3 of these boxes back then, stacked on top of each other. I love them. They probably fade a few paces at that stage, and we've had them in our home ever since. And now the dealer, Michael Backman, has a lot of these. So if you're still interested in knowing that you can get these, they are available here in London. And Michael, mine looks just like this, but his pictures are better than mine. So these wonderful objects are still there. But my reason for producing them, as with the paper beforehand, is about the motifs. And it's the motif of this, especially. Oops, sorry, God. Get back to. wrong one. It's this that I'm mostly interested in here. And I'm not going to give my motifs a name, as you did with the previous lecture. That's not what I'm interested in. So you all know where everything is. Of course, I never know when I'm giving a lecture like this where I will have English people in the audience, but you guys know everything, so you don't need to be told where the Maranao live. All these lovely pictures I found just the other day on the internet, I wanted to see pictures of people wearing the malong, because having never seen any myself when we lived there, I had to get internet photos. So it looks to me like the most extraordinary textile, and we've talked a lot about textiles being used and what are they used for, and here it has the most multiple use of all. So let's look at the Spanish failure in the 16th, 17th century to convert the people of the region to Christianity. It was due to the determined resistance of the coastal and lowland Muslims in Sulu and Mindanao. The Spanish-Muslim rivalry had a profound effect on the arts and crafts of the southern Philippines. By resisting rapid colonization, the Muslims prevented the racial destruction of natives' arts and crafts. And that's really what we're interested in here, is the destruction. And the superb lecture we had this morning shows on how we're trying to revive this. So what is it about these textiles? So fortunately, if those of you came yesterday, I did bring 3 of our own pieces. So if I've hopefully marked them up as to where these collections come from. So mine is the kind of squiggly one on the right-hand side. Sadly, I've never actually seen the Malon Andon, which to me, from what I know about textiles now, is probably one of the most sophisticated textiles that's come out of the southern Philippines. So the andon is malong is a tubular skirt traditionally worn by the Sultan and either by elite men and women of the Maranao of the southern Philippines. Evidence shows that the malong alandap on the right-hand side has been worn since probably around the 1500s and inspired by Indian textiles, and is probably one of those most highly valued types of malong. It's made of very thin silk, we know as sutra. Most commonly found colour is alternating colour schemes of yellow, magenta, green, white. I think I had a green one yesterday as well. The long tubes are made of broad bands of silk that are joined together with a tapestry band down the middle known as the lanket. So the tapestry we've discussed a lot this morning, and the lanket, I think, are extraordinary. And what I'm hoping to discuss after this is, did they make them separately and add them on? Did they make them at the same time? Was it all part of a central inspiration? That I don't know, and I hope you're going to answer that afterwards. So we have 3 parts, and we'll look at that again in a moment, from the lanket and the tobiran and the motifs of the okir, or the okiran. So patola, for those of you here yesterday, you heard me talk about patola. Patola is a textile that was made in India, all right? So it was made for an Indian sari generations ago. But let's go back to what was made for this part of the world. The Indonesians or the Thais, the Filipinos, I don't have enough history on it, but I suspect the same, imported the textile because they wanted it. They ordered a specific pattern from India. India didn't send what they wanted, they sent what was ordered. It's very important to remember that, because this design, the one on the right here, the Jelamprang motif, and this way it was woven, was made specifically for the Indonesian stroke Malay Filipino market where it was moved around. So these very loosely woven, very open patterns were not made in India. They were made specifically for this region. And I think it's imperative to understand that as to how the Indian contacts were done. So the designs here, the ones in the middle that were interpreted into the andon, so they took the Jelamprang motif, which you see on the right, which is a patola end up in Indonesia, and tried to work with it. So we know that they're replicating a Jelamprang from the way the pattern is brought together, but it's not perfect because they were not able to make it in the Wefdikat as it should have been done. So these were also found, textiles, we found them in Pegu in southern Burma, in Bantan, which was the trading port on the north coast of Java, and also in Sumatra, and then of course widely traded across the region. So the andon, extraordinary textile, and I would love to see a piece in my hand, and I've yet to actually to see one in a museum. So these all come from online articles that are, online collections I've been able to find. So the variations of the Dilamprang. So the Dilamprang is known in India as Chabadi Bhat. That's the word for this patola design. This is literally here referred to as a flower basket. So this is how it's been interpreted into the andon. And it's really the rarest and most difficult of all the Maranao tubular skirts. So the andon actually refers to patola. And I hope all of you are going to tell me, is that a direct interpretation? So when we have a discussion afterwards, please tell me that. The scholar Abe Sakil writes that the weaving of the andon malong was covered in great secrecy, and the great technical knowledge was needed and prized among master weavers. Again, that's something I don't know if these are woven now, and I think we discussed that this morning, but I'd like to know more about that as well. So I'm going to have to dispute something else that was said just in the speaker before me about the tumpul motif. I recently wrote an article for the Thai Textile Society on the tumpul border. You can find it, it's available online through academia on my page. The tumpul did not originate in India. The tumpul design was inspired by the Malay Javanese people themselves. The textiles were made in India because that's what was ordered from the island cultures. The Indians don't have a tumpul as such as we see in these in their textiles in India. So please, I would love to have a discussion with Florina about this. But I think, and I hope Fiona will back me up, that the tumpul is not Indian. The tumpul came from Southeast Asia region, and that's very important to remember as to what it means. So the tumpul also comes in different designs. The one in the middle has these sort of jagged edge, looks like a leaf. We can call it pucuk rabung, you can call it lawi ayam, or you can call it tumpul. So the straight tumpul, which is a triangular design, is very much you see on Javanese batik. Very straight, and it came on in the Indian trade cloths that I showed you yesterday. The lawi ayam and the pucuk rabung is much more in the Malay world. The lawi ayam looks like feathered edges, and the pucuk rabung looks more like a leaf or a bamboo shoot. So it's a different word for a slightly different variation of the same pattern. So the textiles, okay, so we have the lanket. So the lanket is this incredible tapestry pattern. And I'm not a weaver, so I don't go into that, the techniques, as the previous speakers have done that. But I still think it's extraordinary that they wove these pieces of silk and they're all machined together and then created this extraordinary textile. So we see how the lakban is the border along the top and the tobiran is the word for down the middle. Did they decide in advance of which would go where? Was it always a fixed tradition? This is things that I don't know, and I don't seem to have been able to find that anywhere in particular. So the variations of the colours is extraordinary, and the width of the bands as well is quite remarkable. So they were tubular skirts and dresses, as something is worn in many parts of Asia. And it appears in China where they would refer to this type of embroidery pattern as kesi, or K-E-S-I as it was spelled. It was a similar technique. It's something that was carried on in China for centuries. Jacqueline Simcox, she does a Chinese textile dealer and really art historian herself, has talked a lot about kesi to really understand. Did the inspiration for this technique come from China? Maybe. But the pattern, absolutely not. The patterning has nothing to do with anything Chinese at all. But what it has to do is to go back to the word ukia, which was mentioned in the previous speaker's lecture, and the word burdos. So the burdos is what you see on the top here. And a burdos is the word for a scrolling vine. Now, till I started researching, I'd never heard of burdos before. It's an interesting word. I don't know if all you Filipinos are going to be able to tell me that it means something else. I'd like to know that. I also had, there was a lecture given here, an exhibition 20 years ago at SOAS in the Brunei Gallery. It came from Kalimantan, and it was all about wood carving and designs. And the ukiran design, these types of motifs, appeared all over the east coast of Malaysia and the Malay world. This is a prevalent motif that appears everywhere in this region. So it's often rendered and carved in wood, silver, wall paintings, and Arabic motifs. So the key aspects of the influence of these migrating traditions on Maranao textiles the uniquenesses have been incorporated here. And they come through in these lanket strips. In the past, Okia designs, particularly for textiles, are distinctive enough that America could easily distinguish which region from their textile came from. That's another issue that came up with the previous speaker, is when you look at this, I can't tell, hopefully maybe some of you can tell, those three different designs here, do you know which particular region they actually came from? So the whole concept of this particular okia or akil or yukiran, there are many different ways of describing it. I have more knowledge of the Iban than I do of the Maranao, which is just a new subject for me. But we have this very interesting, the Sarimanok, which seems to be very important to the Maranao. And this wonderful piece at the top here, where the Sarimanok is placed just perfectly on top of this. For me, this motif is much more, you would call it a lawi ayam. It just appears with these feathery designs. So it's a tumpel, but it should not be called a tumpel, which in theory is a direct isosceles triangle. So again, as I said, I've written a lot about this. I think we have to be very careful when you describe this ubiquitous pattern as to quite how you actually describe it. So the sari manok is derived from the word sari, meaning a variety of, and collection, and manok means chicken or bird, which a collection of chickens, which is what it is. If you're in Sumba, of course, you see the chicken or the turkey or this type of hen with these wonderful feathered tails. So they're ubiquitous in this part of the world. And is often associated with ancestral spirits and a harbinger of good fortune, and believed to appear to individuals in dreams and visions, bringing messages from the spirit world. And the image of the sari manok is commonly found in traditional art forms, including textiles, wood carvings, and metalwork. So what I put down on the bottom here is another piece from the Michael Beck collection, where we see the same, almost like a birdhouse design carved through the top and edges. And the Dayak wood carving is actually a door with their version, what they call yukiran. So it's the same interconnecting motif. So for me, when I was studying this, I didn't see the connections with the Minang. That didn't seem to come up with the use of the words. But sometimes for us scholars, we see what we want to see and ignore what we don't want to see. So if you're researching in one area, we tend to only have time, maybe. So maybe the inspiration of this motif, if you spread it out a little, it goes much further. It's just that when you get to the Minang, it becomes much more flory and much more leaf-like. But you keep it to the Borneo Malay world, east coast of Malaysia, the Sumatra world, and east coast of Malaysia and Borneo, it becomes simpler. It's not Minang, very different, I think, to the Minang world. So Malay world songkets. Most people call these tumpel because they don't have another word. Now you're looking, the one in the middle here, this wonderful old textile here, appears more as a tumpel. It has nothing fiddly going on with the edges. So this was taken in the Textile Museum in Kuala Lumpur, where they're dreadfully hung and very poorly lit. So I'm sorry for the quality of the picture, but they have great pieces, old pieces that you just don't see anymore. But I put the classic, fairly Malay textile on the top that's not specially old to show you how these tumpel border patterns have become used in this Malay world, where they interject with each other. And we see this on batik, especially in Lasem on the north coast of Java, this same concept of doing this. And the weavers in Terengganu told me years ago when I did research there, when I was doing my MA, is that they reckon all the songket comes from Palembang, which originally came from India. So the Malay world, that's the concept of, not the patterns, remember, just the concept of gold supplementary weft weaving, which we call songket in the Indonesian world. And the piece at the bottom here, I absolutely love this. Can we relate what we're seeing here? Are these a version of a tumpel design, an isosceles triangle? The border pattern here is very much what we're seeing here on the Minang pieces. Sorry, not on the Minang, on the Maranao textiles. So this conference is all about, translocating textiles. We tend to look for something that may not be there. But we're just presenting you with ideas. And the last piece, of course, is the Maranao, the Gado jar. And what are we looking at the top of here with these rows of isosceles triangles, which appear on a lot of objects in that region? Now, what does it mean to the Maranao with these? But many of these jars, and again, the Michael Bachmann Gallery has a lot of these wedding jars, huge like this, full of all the same motifs that you're seeing on the yukiran. So Langkasuka, it's something that I've thought about and looked at for a long, long time. So this region on the north coast, northeast and north central Malaysia and southern Thailand was hugely important for a long period. So we're looking, it really was founded probably about the 2nd century. This Malay kingdom really in the neighborhood of modern-day Patani. And there's a lovely quote. It says, "He was dressed in rose-coloured royal regalia with a chaplet of gold flowers and a necklace of jewels." So any time description I read from Chinese texts, it's really referring to somebody wearing some kind of textile with songket in it, some form of supplementary gold. So this type of textile weaving was being known for a long, long time. Many centuries before we even think about it today. So Langkasuka is also a word known as a spiral motif. It really derived from the Ayutthaya kingdom of Siam and the Majapahit, who ruled in a Mandala kingdom on the east coast of Java right up into the 15th century. So this motif was inspired by the process of growth in nature and the goddess sculpture, which expresses rituals and customs surrounded by a beautiful arrangement of flowers and body. The states of northeast Malaysia are heirs to the legacy and the former Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms of the Malay states of Kelantan and Terengganu. Because of their relative isolation from the international traffic in the Straits of Malacca, these regions have retained more of their territory in their traditional Malay cultures. The Hindu-Buddhist and Malay states existed on the Thai-Malay Isthmus from the 1st to the 15th century, and Chinese annals from the Lao and the 6th centuries report the existence of Malay kingdom called Yang Hu Siu, known as Langkasuka, near present-day Patani in Thailand. And the hinterland region for this were trading with all the forest products that came from the Malay region, from the silks from China, and this region brought in all the metal and the gold that they needed to weave their textiles. So to conclude, in her book, Habi, Pastor Rohis gave me the clearest description on the 2 Malong textiles under discussion in his paper. She references the great textile scholar Buller in his seminal essay on patola, stating that the compositional framing in Southeast Asia textiles derives from Indian sources. The doubly capped patola were carried by traders to all of the regions. And the people of Meningagao, quote, said, "Fine textiles of silk wrought with gold, which at times they called patolas." I think there was a lot of issue as to use of the word patola. Did they think of it as patola, or did they see it just as something Indian? That is something we don't know. So in the Maranao Andon, patola influence from India was mediated by a more direct influence from Indonesia. However, there are local tastes at play, as well with the addition of the sari manok and the use of the uke-uke motif. This paper will argue that both the Malong landop, ceremonial dress retained at heirlooms, and the Malong andong of the Maranao, along with their use of the uke motif, appears to have been influenced by a local response to textile traditions originating from distant Gujarat and the wider Austronesian diaspora. In my mind, the title of this conference, Translocating Textiles, is well suited to the Malong of the Maranao, as the motif described not only from India but within the Muslim Malay community in the Dayak of Borneo are all at play in these remarkable textiles. Thank you very much.
Thank you.